We got a podcast tonight, huh?
Yep.
Suppose we could figure out what we're talking about.
Didn't you say you said something about some meta?
Meta. That's been an idea we thought for a while. So I thought it might be worth talking meta. Remember, because we played Stanley Parable. Remember, and that's when I came up with the idea.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So, but I guess if we're going to talk about meta, where are we going to come from? Come from the fourth wall. Come from live from Nick's kitchen. Because that's where we are.
True.
That's meta.
Yeah. It seems too simple.
Well, okay. We come from who does a lot of meta jokes?
We could do something from Order of the Stick, but you're not that familiar with that.
I've read some, but not that many. Yeah.
Yeah. Muppet Show. Well, you done Muppet Show.
What?
You never know.
Strong Bad Homes they refer to themselves quite a bit.
Oh, okay. So we could be from Strong Badia.
Strong Badia.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
see, I'm hosting tonight.
Yes.
So we'd be live from Strong Badia. Derailed Trains of Thought.
All right. We got the first part done. All right, then we have the talk. So we should probably make some notes. Where's my notepad? Okay. So Stanley Parable. I think maybe we'll start with that because that was our idea.
Yes.
And we'll probably have to explain.
Yeah. Oh, you're getting into soundtrack already.
What? No, Stanley Parable.
Not soundtrack. You're getting into Story School. That's what.
Oh yeah, Story School. Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't want to talk because you didn't. Did you want to talk at all about your trip to? Where did you go to see your family's parents? Natasha's
we were in
parents?
Peoria, in Illinois. Because that's where my wife's grandparents are, and so her mom was visiting there from Brazil, obviously.
Yeah.
And then she's with us currently for a couple days, and then she'll head back to Brazil in about Tuesday next week.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so I could mention that. I don't know if anyone would find that interesting.
Well, I know. I mean, I knew all that.
Well, but
just in case.
Well, if we're going to talk about stuff, you have to make sure you mention Comic-Con.
Yeah, because I went to Indie Comic-Con.
And saw Jenna Coleman.
I saw Jenna Coleman and Carrie Fisher there. Yeah. And, there'll be some interesting stories about that, but maybe we'll save that for our Take on Tales.
Oh, that might be better, because that could be a good place to put. We were doing that second half.
Yes, okay. Second half.
So
I just thought it'd be worth mentioning that since we missed the weekly hijack this time.
Yeah.
Some people might want to know. But anyway, we'll get to that.
Okay. So okay.
Make sure we mention that, and then okay. Yeah. Now we need to figure out this meta thing for the Story School.
For Story School. Okay, so Stanley Parable, I think where we start.
Okay.
Because Stanley Parable, remember when we played it? You're the guy in the computer lab.
It's a crazy game.
That narrator just talks, and you're like, okay, which way should I go?
He's so earnest.
He is, and you're like, I want to listen to this guy.
Because he's the narrator for the game, and then so basically you kind of feel like, okay, well, I mean, there's two ways. You're either inclined to go with it.
Well, that's when I saw the preview. That's why I want to play it. But you got to these doors, and the guy says, and then Stanley turned left, and you're like, and then the guy in the preview went right, and you're like, what is this game? I want to play this thing. And then it just starts making fun of all these kind of conventions in video games, like following the directions and
going the path that you're supposed to go.
And dying or not dying. And just, when you spend, there's that whole sidetrack where you make a video game inside the video game. Yeah. And you have that baby screaming. And then apparently if you actually play that horrible game for 2 hours, you get a special ending.
It's special, all right. It's more like I don't know if it's worth the pain that you have to go through to
It's
get
worth
that.
watching someone else do it and watching on YouTube. But I have to say, Stanley Parable is it's very hard. Like I showed it to some of my, to some of the youth that come over. It's what you just gotta put them in front of and just play this. We did that with Nathan, remember?
Yeah. You don't give them any explanation whatsoever and just let them experience it and be completely confused the entire time.
Nathan, it was great because Nathan played. I love and he followed everything the narrator said, and you win. And then you're just like, oh,
The whole game is sort of about like
breaking from mind control, and then
you did exactly what the narrator told you to.
it's
So
genius. It's a wonderful game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably worth getting on a sale because you can only really play it for a couple hours before it gets old.
Yeah.
But I got it in a pack, and I've shown it to lots of people ever since then. And, I mean, did you ever have a chance to show it to anyone?
I never did. Although thank you for reminding me. I'll be glad, because it really is one of those games that like you want to experience once and then you want to inflict on other people.
And you want to inflict just because it plays with all those. I love that other ending where it says, "Don't go this way, you go this way," and like, no, seriously, don't go this way. You do, and then you die.
Yeah,
and then you're not dead, and then you're in this museum. That's the credits.
Yeah,
and it shows like a museum showing the different
ways
early versions of the game as you walk around the museum.
And there's a completely different narrator.
Narrator commenting on why the previous narrator does. I mean, it's just trippy.
And that one actually gives like one of the earliest like really indications of what's actually going on in the story.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It takes like a third person to basically tell it.
What was it? The first one we did was we're way off track. We didn't really get back to story school, but the first one you did was or one of the first ones we did was we answered that phone call, and then we were back at our home, and it's like, Stanley, here's you have something you love at home.
Yeah.
This is your meaning life. And then you go in there and it's all fake, and then the whole world starts changing, and it says that basically all you do when you play a video game is pressing buttons, and it just. And after that, you just feel really kind of worn out.
The narrator kind of beats you down. That's one of the ones where the narrator gets really upset with you. I mean,
there's one where he yells at you.
Yeah, well, that one's the one where you do everything he says until the very end. Essentially. I mean,
is that the one where you try to blow up the?
Basically, you instead of
he just screams at you and says, "Aha, I killed you."
Well, I think it's actually like. I think you're essentially trying to control the mind control device instead of destroying it like you're supposed to.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to take control of the mind control device, and he gets very upset at you for not being the hero you're supposed to be.
Well, and then I don't know if you saw it, but later on I did one where you're in this perfect ending and the stars and everything. And the narrator's like, we just need to stay here, except you just stay there.
There's nothing else to do.
And so you as a player, you're like, you can't just sit there. This isn't an ending. And the narrator says it's an ending, it's beautiful, but you want to do something. So all that you can do is go up these staircase and jump off,
and kill yourself.
And try to kill yourself. And he's like, why are you doing this? And the thing is, as a game, and that's what's so great about Stanley Parable, as a game, it's playing against, you're doing things because that's what you do in a game. You keep moving. You try and find something to do. You don't just sit there.
The reverse ending of that is there is one where Stanley stops doing anything.
That's true.
And then the narrator wants him to keep going. Keep moving on. You got to progress.
So what I think when you do in this story school is mention that. I mean, meta. See if I can formulate it right. First off, it's very funny many times.
Yeah.
And Stanley Parable is hilarious, but Stanley Parable also shows meta can kind of point out conventions and are they good or not. There's a lot of things in at least in Stanley Parable you do, and then you realize in the context of the character you are, you won't ever do that, but you're doing it because it's a video game,
right?
And it really separates the hope of they always talk about the suspension of disbelief. That's kind of generally been the desire of any sort of art form, is to make you suspend your disbelief, and meta basically flips that on its head. And tries to make you realize that you're watching something or realize that you're reading something. And it's very interesting for that way. And in some ways, it can be really incisive. Is that the right word?
Insightful?
Well, insightful too, but incisive, like when you cut to the heart of something. Anyways, it could be insightful too. So I think it's cool. Like, it's really neat about that. And a lot of times it's attached to satire. You read that. Yeah, it was on Children and Wells, that blog post. I wrote about how to write a blog post.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Or basically, that's very meta of you kind of your whole brain stirring process. Yeah, as if we were recording this right now. Kind of trying to figure out what we're doing,
which would be ridiculous. Yeah. But in the blog, basically, you do it. But the funny thing is that most writers can read and be like, yes, that's exactly how I do it. So you're revealing something while making people laugh, which is the best way to teach, and not best way, but a very good way to teach. Make them laugh while you're peeling away the levels of the onion.
Yeah. Well, and Stanley Parable, I mean, we'll get away from we don't have to talk about Stanley Parable the entire
No, I think
school.
people might get bored.
But the interesting thing about it is it's not just making a commentary about like, oh, video games are kind of funny, haha, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, if you really start to think about, because of the nature of the video game, you start to think about things of like predestination and free will.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
How much free will do you really have in Stanley Parable? You really only like, there are all these different paths that you can choose to follow.
Well, they've all been made by the programmer already.
Yeah, there's only certain things you can do in it.
And I think the thing about meta, I think we'll bring up at some point, will be I like meta. I write a lot. I love meta humor. You know, like my blog article. I've done other things like that. I reposted one of my early short stories about this first person narrator learning how to first person narrate.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Which totally, after the fact, when I heard it was like Fred Milish inspired or something, oh yeah, that totally was Fred in that.
Yeah, exactly. But I think meta also has a danger of robbing a piece of art of meaning, of giving you this sense of futility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because there's parts of Stanley Parable where you just feel like, what's the use of anything?
Yeah, if you read too much into it, it can feel a little nihilistic or kind of, you know.
And I think meta has that power because art intrinsically has meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you bring us outside of suspension disbelief, and you start seeing all the moving pieces, then all you see are the moving pieces.
Yeah.
Or you can, and then you're like, oh well, it stops being a story. It starts being it's not a whole anymore.
Right. And I do think that's the danger of some of our deconstructionist sort of approach to media sometimes now. Like, I think we mentioned in a previous episode, TV tropes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, we talked. I don't remember. Was it last time we talked about that? And
I will have to look it up before we start.
Actually, you know, now that I think about it, maybe we cut it. I think we might have cut it out of the comedy one.
Okay.
Or not comedy.
Beauty.
The last one, romance.
Romance.
Because we were talking about romance.
Beauty, romance, something like that.
Yes, because we start. Anyway, that's not important. But TV tropes is a site, you know, where people basically boil storytelling down to all kinds of like little bits and pieces, and sometimes, and the creators or the people involved with the website themselves will admit, if you get too deep into this stuff, then you take out all the magic out of any storytelling. You just can't, you know, kick back and relax. You remember, it's just a show. You should really just relax.
Yeah. Make sure
you forget about all that kind of stuff if you go too far into the meta.
And I used to think I listened to this my teaching company thing on short stories. They had one from I'm gonna forget her name, but it was this first kind of popular meta fiction, and you know, pretty modern stuff. And we have a lot of meta as a art form or as something that's very common. Seems to be very new. And I always think it's very modern, kind of postmodern, kind of, you know, we're always hyper conscious of our own stuff. Yeah. But then I was thinking before we got here, I thought, well, Shakespeare plays with this meta. I mean, like in Hamlet, there's a play within a play. I mean, and Hamlet's going to find out the king's problem, his guilt, by putting something in the play that will reflect on the king. And we're watching a play about this, and then Hamlet will turn to the audience and tell them something. You know, and in other things, in comedies, there's, I mean, from one of my understanding, that everyone's a guy. All the actors are guys.
Old school comedies, yeah.
I mean, like in Shakespearean time.
Yeah, yes, okay, yeah.
And in his comedies, and some were playing girls, and then sometimes the girls will dress up as guys, which, you know, is just going to be funny,
right?
Because there's a guy playing a girl dressed up as a guy. So
because all the actors were guys when,
from what I understand, Again, I might be wrong with that, but that's what I seem to remember from English class.
You may want to look it up before we start recording.
Yeah, I know. That's why I have my notepad here.
Good idea.
But Shakespeare, and again, he was very good at, he had this structure, he had the 5-act structure, he knew it, you know. Once you get really familiar with the structure, you can't help, especially if you want to be funny, playing with it sometimes. You know, saying, oh, this is funny to, the Taylor trilogy, the third one. You know, we have all kinds of little meta jokes from the two narrators.
Yeah.
Being like, we are just figures in the story of Mike and Sophia.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can add a sense of story to real life, I guess. Like in that case, it's not so much trying to deconstruct the story as try to frame it as a as if their lives were, I mean, like their lives are real and we're just watching sort of deal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you remember I mentioned Order of the Stick a minute ago.
Yeah.
Just name popped in my head. Order of the Stick.
This is why we talk about this beforehand so we can sound really professional.
Exactly. But there was a long, I think I might have talked about this sometime in the podcast, and I'll mention that. But there was a long story arc in the last book, basically, about, because one of the characters is a bard, and throughout the whole series, he's like making like fourth wall jokes and talking about narrative conventions and things like this because he's a bard. He likes to tell stories, and so he's actually one of my favorite characters. I mean, he's very incredibly naive and childlike, but in a fun way. But anyway, so they meet his dad eventually, and his dad is actually this big time villain, but he thinks in the same narrative conventions that his son does. And so, like, the entire climax of the book is the villain trying to get his son, who's not the main character, at least of the, like, overarching quest, he's trying to get his son to follow narrative convention. So he's trying to, like, slaughter all his friends so that the son can come back and avenge him and kill, basically. Because the dad's a villain, but he wants to go out in a blaze of glory. He's like, look, I know I'm going to go out, but I want to go out properly.
Yeah.
And so there's this huge convention, like, you're not doing it right.
That's awesome.
And so it becomes, like, it's fun, and like that's a sense of like it's following a narrative construct and fully aware, the character is fully aware of it and trying to push it to happen a certain way.
And it works really well. I mean, for comedy, it works great. I mean, Muppets always play on this sort of stuff.
Oh yeah,
Lots Point Berg.
There's no Muppet canon technically, like, because people will get confused by this sometimes. You'd be like, well, why are they trying to save the theater in the Muppets, where they had to save the theater in It's a Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie, and it turned out it was a historical landmark. Well, that you might as well ask, well, why did the Muppets meet on a road trip in one movie, and then another trip they went to college together, and then went to Manhattan? Yeah. Like they don't really care.
I've never really thought about. The Muppets and the Muppets. They just rewrite themselves constantly.
Yeah. Well, and even in the Muppet movie, which is supposedly their origin story, Robin asks Kermit, "Is this really how it happened?" And Kermit says, "Well, it's sort of approximately." So even they admit that their origin story is not actually accurate.
That's very postmodern. So I wonder, what would be nice for this to round it out when we get there? Because a lot of our ideas so far have been, comedy related. If we could have some sort of idea of a serious version of.
Well, one more interesting comedy thing.
I have one more actually too, but
I don't know how meta it is technically, but it does break the fourth wall. It's an interesting comedic tradition, I think, particularly in silent film. Like, I think in Laurel and Hardy, they used to do this a lot, where Laurel was the dumb guy, then Hardy was a straight man.
Okay.
And every once in a while, when Laurel did something just absolutely ridiculous, Hardy would look into the camera. This kind of this like, really?
Oh yeah,
kind of look.
Like the Shakespearean aside sort of thing.
Yeah, sort of an aside. Funny thing is, there's one of these in the Fellowship of the Ring.
Is there really?
And you don't even think about it at the time because it's so brief. But like right after Gimli joins the Fellowship, right after Legolas. Yeah, he's like, "And you shall have my bow and my axe." And then right after that, Legolas gives this look of, and for a minute, for just a moment,
60 seconds.
Okay, not 60 seconds, but for a moment, Legolas locks eyes with the camera, which actors are never supposed to do, but you don't even think about it because, like,
go watch that.
It's like this, like,
that's a good thing.
Like you suddenly like empathy.
Yeah, I'm writing that one down so we may remember to talk about that one.
Yeah, so it's like there's one moment where you get to empathize. Yeah, empathize, because you've got this lock eyes with them for a moment and then move on.
A movie that uses a lot of meta and sometimes very funny, and at the end in kind of in a strange way. And I had to bring it up because I like my Monty Python.
Well, who doesn't?
I'm sure some people.
Yeah, probably.
Apparently my mom used to watch it, Flying Circus. And her mom would be like, "This is so ridiculous," but would sit out there the whole time and watch it, laugh at it, and then be like, "Why do you watch this stuff?" But Monty Python, the Holy Grail, you got the credits that are very meta with the the guy writing the credits, talking the credits, and then the animator had a heart attack and all that sort of stuff. But the end is annoying.
It is,
and it's interesting because it completely. I mean, it's meta because the people searching for these fictional character, which you just thought was a joke, comes in, but it like
interrupts everything.
Well, And it worked. And I guess it's in some ways genius that the movie was actually building towards a climax. Like it wasn't as ridiculous as this movie is.
They
I
were
was thinking about this
actually
the other day. You know, you actually care about them beating up these French people in the tower, and then these guys come in, and it diffuses the entire tension and the hope and everything you wanted out of the end of the movie.
It just comes to a screeching halt,
and it just makes you mad. You know, so it's part comedy and it's part just. I mean, it completely destroyed the normal emotional feel of a movie. I mean, because sometimes you get a comedy movie, you don't even care about the finale because you know they're just waiting for the joke. But that one, you kind of like. Everything's so funny and stuff. You expect some sort of big, huge something at the end, and then it's just boom.
Yeah, it's true. And and even sometimes when I've watched Monty Python, I might even stop like after the bridge.
The bridge, yeah.
Yeah, because like, okay, after that, that's the last really funny part. And it's like another French taunting, and then like the movie's done. So the bridge is like the last satisfying
It ends up being the climax in many ways. It's weird. It's a weird structure. But I guess for them, you know, they're always subverting themselves.
Yeah.
And I mean, meta in many ways is subversion. When we first came up with this idea, what was it? I called metas a 3D pun.
Oh, I see. Because it's coming at you.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it's multi-layered. Mm-hmm. But it's essentially a pun. It's basically, here's what it says and here's what it means. Mm-hmm. And it has a lot of the same properties of a pun, I think. And puns were used religiously. And I read some other pun. You know, didn't I on a podcast one time mention that the pun also rises?
Yes.
That book.
Yeah, I think we talked about.
But they talk about, you know, how puns were also used to create significance. And I'm sure if we thought hard enough, we could come up with some sort of serious meta example. Like you get those really heady movies sometimes where like the ending talks about like the people watching it. I can't think of a good example, but I feel like I've seen one like that.
Well, I can. Here's a thought. I think the Bible gets a little meta sometimes. I mean, I guess you could say the Bible gets meta a lot in that. And if you get into the theology of it, always kind of you know the Spirit talking to you through it. But Jesus's last prayer at the Last Supper, he prays for all of the future believers,
which is really weird to read. Actually,
it really is because it's like the one moment where you feel like Jesus is talking about you,
like directly.
Yeah. I mean. It could be argued, okay, he's talking about the whole future church. There's a lot of people.
I know, but when you read it, it feels that way. It feels like do.
It's. I mean, in the whole.
We should look that chapter up before it's John something.
Yeah, it's
like 16 or 17,
something like that.
Sound like we're all religiously interesting.
Yes, I mean, and the whole concept of God speaking to you through Scripture is. I don't know. It's not meta in any other way that we talk about here, but it
is in some way. I mean,
that's an example of like words on a page and then words kind of coming at you, you know, on another level too.
That's true.
Probably the best way.
Yeah, exactly.
But for an act,
forest fire, then this bear comes. Only you can know. I won't bring that one up. It's just bad. I don't know. That's what I got right now. I got most of that written down. Okay. We have room for a few more. I think.
Never-ending story.
Never-ending story.
Now you can probably tell me more about that one then, because you read the book.
The books. Yeah, it's not quite meta. I mean, it's a weird.
It plays with the narrative.
It plays
ideas and things
because
like
the
that.
reader himself isn't. Yeah, but it does play with the idea because Bastian is reading a book, and he knows he's reading the book, and the book talks back to him, and he's like, "What?" And then the best part is at the end, not the end, the middle, the end of the Atreyu part, and the beginning of the Bastian getting in the book, because then the Empress. The childlike Empress goes to, and she's kind of like the source of all stories.
Okay.
And he goes to, I don't remember what the guy's name is, but he's the guy who records all the stories. So we get to this scene where she's talking and he's recording it and Bastian is listening to it. And it's like this weird, like three-way.
Whoa.
It's kind of like he's the guy who writes this. It's weird. It's cool. I mean, the book I have has some things in green font, some things in red font, depending what level you're at.
Yeah, we're
Inception,
Yeah, I was wondering when that was going to come up.
It's vaguely Inception-ish.
Yeah,
and it's not done for comedy. It's done for story. I mean, they'll talk about, you get philosophical, maybe we can bring this in too, is the meta narrative, that people need a narrative of their lives that makes everything fit like they're a piece in a story.
Well,
and literature does that occasionally.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that, if that would be considered meta, because sometimes you do have these stories where the author sort of inserts himself as in like, this is where I got the, Tolkien with the Red Book of Westmark, which Bilbo and Frodo wrote, that basically contains a lot of the early information that Tolkien somehow found about Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings. Would you consider that meta, or is that something
I don't know.
else?
It's close. I mean, it's of the same kindred, I would think.
Yeah. I guess you could say Lewis with the Space Trilogy was kind of similar too, in that Lewis was a character in his own books. Sort of thing.
That's true. I forgot about that. Or from what I understand, the Dark Tower by Stephen King.
Okay.
Stephen King is a character in Dark
really?
Tower. Yeah.
Oh,
his younger self is a character in it.
Oh wow.
Yeah. That they show up and talk to sometimes. And he's the guy writing the book. So
that's fun.
So there's a lot of I really feel like it's much more common now, because story is something we all live in now. I mean, we're surrounded by stories all the time. And so this idea of levels of story makes sense to us, because it's like a language to us that we all understand now.
We think more deeply about story than probably any other time in human culture.
In any day, you can consume a dozen of them.
Yeah. You can watch videos on YouTube of people watching TV shows, or at least like some of the highlights of their reaction. I mean, in a sense, what we do with the Weekly Hijack is very similar to that.
Very close to that.
It's like right after, it's like, okay, what do we think about this? How are we feeling about this?
And so I think it really is a two-edged sword. Like, we'll have to mention again the deconstruction, but it also, I think, could reinforce the sense that, from a Christian point of view, this is a story.
Yeah.
It's not meaningless. It's not like we just showed up and we live our lives and we die. Yeah. That there's a beginning and end, there's a Genesis and a Revelation. And that meta in some ways can reinforce that idea of storyhood for people. And
maybe that is a good takeaway that we can make out of all this. Because instead of going like the existential
meta, this is horrible and we all
it's like where you're kind of forced to go through all this and all this stuff. I mean, it's interesting with Stanley Parable, but for a Christian, it's almost like you're looking at the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of a problem, the tricky thing about, like, Calvinism. Like, you're focusing on this predestination stuff, and you lose, because of that, sometimes people lose sight of the free will sort of thing. And I always like the saying, I don't remember if I said it on the podcast before, but I saw somewhere that life is like a game of cards. Predestination is the hand you're dealt, and then free will is what you do with those cards, which makes a lot of sense to me. But I think there's definitely something to. It's certainly fine. It's certainly cool to think about people living in their own stories and living it out, as long as they don't feel like they're trapped by that.
Yeah. To me, it would be more of a sense of meaning, giving meaning to people who don't have a sense of. I mean, a lot of people think, if there's a secular mindset, that there is no purpose. Mm-hmm. It's a very Bohemian Rhapsody sort of lifestyle, or Albert Camus. I had to write it down, but for your thing, Margaret Atwood is the lady who wrote that short, the meta fiction that I mentioned. I mentioned it earlier.
Okay,
but her thing was called Happy Endings. It was this whole story about wrote these two people the same way, but different things would happen in the middle of the story, but they will all end with and then they died. And we're talking about whether there are happy endings or not happy endings, or is just the stuff in between. I mean, it's kind of is more of an example of the depressing version of it.
Right.
But it's playing with the conventions of literature and story, and what you find interesting in story and what you don't find interesting in story. I haven't read it, but it sounded like a very interesting. That was from the Teaching Company story.
And the other thing to consider too, in separating Stanley Parable from real life, a real person has lots of choices.
Yeah, exactly. You can only program so much into Skyrim apparently. I don't know, but
yeah.
So is that I got quite a lot sheet here. You think that's enough to go with for our story school tonight?
I hope so. I mean, there's a lot of ideas in there. We'll see if we can distill it into something that makes sense. Yeah, so, that's always a trick.
That's always the problem.
Whether we can get around to that.
It was a nice thing about what was the last episode with the beauty, when we had to do it twice.
No, that was the romance as a side plot.
Oh yeah, why do you keep thinking beauty?
I don't know. It's like Is that Steve? No, Steve's dead. That's Scott.
That's Scott.
Speaking of meta.
Yes, exactly. Or
right.
you know, this is a red shirt. Why? You know, Boone and in the weekly hijack. That was good stuff. Okay,
that was good stuff.
So okay.
So after that, we'll do our soundtrack.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a little fried, Tim. Can we just play some music for me for a little bit so I can revamp before we figure out what else we're going to do for the second half?
Let me see something. Oh, have you ever heard of Select Start?
I think so. Yeah, they've done. They have this Metroid song that's really good.
Ooh, cool. Well, this is something I've been listening to lately. I think it's pretty cool. From Chrono Trigger.
Anything from good stuff.
Anything from Chrono Trigger is good, right?
Yeah, I probably have heard it at some point then because.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
But it's a remix of Frog's theme, and they just call it theme of Frogs, which it's a fun song. So
okay,
here,
listen to that. Maybe I can get
yeah, check it out. You know, Nick, I have to remind you of this time. I like to try to come up with some sort of summary phrase at the end of the story school, and
I know. I always just have to add one last random thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Give me some sort of sign. Okay, and cross the neck.
Yeah, I'll try to do that this time. Anyway, but Theme of Frogs. That's
that
kind
was
of a
nice.
catchy,
I'm
isn't
not
it?
okay. It wasn't long enough. I'm still. I guess we got half an hour till we have to start this podcast thing, so I'll recover. You really should have played some Glowworm Jim.
Yeah, I suppose.
That always chills me out. So, all right. So we got what, half an hour, 20 minutes?
Yeah. So what are we doing in the second half?
I don't know. What to do?
I suppose we could do our take
on Tales.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't done that for a little bit.
It's been a while. It's been long enough. I think we're safe.
I got some good books this time.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I haven't been reading much lately, but wait, that's right. You finished another one of those giant Brandon Sanderson books.
Yeah, and then finished another Sanderson after that.
Oh man. Okay, you're in kind of a rut though. That's the one problem here. I think the last few take on Tales, and we haven't been doing the winter movie things. You've talked about Brandon Sanderson.
Well, you know what? I was only going to finish Words of Radiance and move on to something else. But Natasha just finished Firefight, which is a sequel to Steelheart. And she's like, Nick, this is the only book we both read. And I want to talk about it. How about you read it? I'm like, okay. And it was really good.
Oh, yeah?
Firefight was at least as good, if not better, than Steelheart.
Ooh, okay.
It was like the perfect sequel because it's like the same setup, but everything's different. Steelheart's like, hey, when there's this this evil superhero villain in charge of this city, we need to kill him.
Uh-huh.
Same thing in episode in Firefight, except like the team gets mixed
Episode
up.
2.
Episode 2. I know, but the team gets mixed up. The stakes are different. The reasoning of doing stuff is different, and it all plays out really well. And everything progresses, and the finale is fabulous and good cliffhanger, just like he does. Sanderson, I've decided reading Words of Radiance and Way of Kings, his big Wheel Time-ish things. I think writing style wise, I like Robert Jordan a little better, but Sanderson can plot and do endings like no one else. His endings are really good. I mean, and his plotting, his like how things unfold. You can tell he's planned it really well. So this hits and this hits, and the Words of Radiance, which is the Way of Kings sequel, like 1,100 pages. I mean, it's ridiculously long.
Is that bigger than the first one? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
By a little bit. Better than the first one, easily.
Really?
There were parts in Way of Kings. It was a very good book. I remember I had kind of this iffy sort of.
Yeah, you're kind of
like every once in a while I'd be like, I didn't want to read it. And then when it got a long time, then I enjoyed it. Though it was longer, Words of Radiance is just tighter. Like, it's almost always interesting, and the kind of the emotional ups and downs of moving you forward are just paced really well. I mean, it still takes forever to read, but it was always worth reading.
That means something.
I mean, that's important. I read somewhere that Sanderson was under a crunch to finish Way of Kings, and he had just finished the last Wheel Time book, and I think it was probably just. I mean, it's still a very good book. But I think this one he had more time and space, and
okay.
And the first book he was revising his first draft. He had written an early draft like years before.
Oh,
so he was still revising.
That'd be like you trying to come back to Strin and Fred.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels different, and this is all new stuff. And I don't know, the finale, the climax of the first one, I might still like better, but the climax of this one is certainly great.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I'll easily read the rest of them. They keep up like this.
Okay. Well, it's kind of interesting that you'll get a chance now to talk about the series as you read through.
I know, because, and I need to find someone else to read them. Well, Kenny reads them.
I was gonna say you should get Kenny on.
I know. I need to go. When I see him, I talk about him with him. I don't see him very often. I'm trying to get Natasha to read them, but. If you're worried about my Sanderson kick, and I think I'm close to him now. Where I've read like a lot of his stuff. I'll probably try to pick up the rest of it at some point. Just like Natasha reads Ted Dekker. She owns every all 30 books.
There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't want all of your take on tail segments to be about Sanderson.
Well, or Wheel Time. No. What I'll have next. I just started A Wizard of Earthsea.
Oh, okay.
Very interesting. Like the style is cool. I mean, it's very like old school sort of. I'll be interested in, after I finish it, talk to you about the anime.
Oh, the Ghibli one. Yeah.
Because I sometimes wonder whether the style of the book itself wouldn't make it seem weird as visual, because it's that sort of, it's like reading some Silmarillion sometimes. It's just pulled back and not modern writing style at all.
Yeah, it might partly, but I know that even the author of that it was another case of like, that's kind of its own thing, like the movie version of it. Kind of like the House.
It's not even remotely close to the.
Yeah.
Now, apparently, there's a sci-fi miniseries, Wizard of Earthsea, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've never seen it, but I remember it being advertised.
Wait, sci-fi as in
the channel?
The channel? Yeah. Oh, interesting.
So that's why I've been reading. They've both been very good. If you like, I think I'll probably tell people that if they like fantasy. Both of them. Well, the quicker one is the Steelheart Firefight. I gave the book to Nathan read Steelheart because it's like those are super villains, and it just
are those YA books technically?
Yeah, they're technically YA books.
Okay,
yeah, and they're fun.
I mean, nothing wrong with that.
And the last one comes out like beginning of next year.
Oh, so it's a trilogy.
And honestly, they're written, and that was sort of my complaint in the first one. I remember, and some scenes were too movie-ish, and I think that's the thing with Sanderson. He does feel sometimes very influenced by the action styles of movies and video games, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but very different from reading like Robert Jordan, who's much more historical. But these would translate to movies ridiculously easy, I think. And I'd go see them.
Cool.
So you haven't been reading much?
No, I haven't been. I got sidetracked from Fellowship of the Ring. I think part of the problem was I got to Lothlorien, which I wanted to be in a very serene place, and I just haven't had time. Like
we've gotten through Khazad-dûm already.
Yes, yeah.
If you go to Gahazadum, you will die.
No, that's the other one.
I know.
Zahadum.
Zahadum.
Then I guess the other thing though that distracted me for a while is I got sucked into an anime, which most anime I watch, I tend to go for the standard season, length ones, 24.
20, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them run forever.
Yeah. The thing with most of the long animes, like your Naruto or Bleach or Dragon Ball Z, most of them you get they wear thin and the longer they go.
Yeah.
Is sort of the problem. I mean, I read Naruto in the manga or Naruto, depending on how some anime people prefer the other.
I don't know.
But I read the manga all the way through because I wanted to see how it ended. But it really should have been like 50 chapters shorter. I felt like there were just way too many final battles and it got really old after a while.
This is the final battle.
And was it always against the same person? I mean, it just felt like it dragged on and on and on. But I got into a shonen anime series. Basically, I started watching it, Hunter x Hunter.
Okay.
You
mentioned that to me.
Yeah. I started watching it kind of during when a lot of TV shows were on holiday hiatus, basically. And they had the first 100 episodes on Netflix, and then I watched there was 48 after that I watched on Crunchyroll, which is sort of a Hulu with anime.
Okay. Great name.
Yeah.
Crunchyroll.
And what I liked about it is that, I mean, it felt, starting off, it did feel in some ways very much like a shonen series. Like there was this the first arc is basically this exam to become a hunter.
Okay.
Which
I don't know if I've ever seen shonen. Shonen?
Shonen, yeah.
Okay.
But that's what I mean by, most of these.
I've heard people say it, and you've said it, and
Yeah, it tends to be anime, especially for boys.
Okay.
A lot of action.
they tend to be experts at some sort of power or something.
Yeah,
that.
Basically.
But without giant robots? That's a whole different genre, isn't it? The giant robot thing.
Basically, in the American sense of I think in Japan, shonen can be just pretty much any kind of action-based series.
Okay.
But I think in U.S. anime fans tend to use shonen in terms of the shows like I just mentioned,
like
Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, Bleach, Fairy Tail. That's another ongoing one. One Piece. Mm-hmm. Basically, they usually have some sort of powers, but they're not superheroes. They have a cast of characters that is ever expanding.
Okay.
Usually some sort of system of power, usually involving spirit energy of some kind.
Okay.
And Hunter x Hunter falls into that category. And like I said, the first arc involves an exam to become a hunter, which is like an official title in this world. But what I appreciated about it pretty early on is they don't go overboard on flashbacks, on basically any sort of padding, because a lot of some of your worst offenders they'll try to drag fights on, and this rarely felt like that. They had some really interesting challenges, and you didn't feel like it was always just about who had the higher power levels or whatever. I mean, occasionally you had a little bit of that, but not in a way that detracted from the story.
Yeah.
The characters always had to use some really interesting strategy to figure out how they were going to get around the situation, and likable characters. Like one of the main characters early on is Gon, and he's your typical kid, and you think he's going to be like your average kind of idiot with a good heart sort of thing. Later on, you find out that he can be really scary when provoked the right way. Then there's Killua, who's about the same age as Gon, and you think he's also, he's the kid that's been trained to be an assassin and has got this really weird, dark family sort of thing. But instead of being like uber emo like Sasuke is in Naruto, he knows how to be cheerful, and he'll go romp around with Gon sometimes. And so he's like Sasuke if Sasuke was actually cool.
I'm not sure I know what that means.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
But people who know Naruto would. But
hopefully then in podcast they'll know.
Yeah, hopefully people on the podcast listen will know that. And then in the first exam, there's a couple other characters. There's Kurapika, who some people have called him a mom character because he's the responsible one.
Okay.
He's slightly older, but at the same time, he's also got this revenge story that he wants to go through. So that's interesting. And then there's Leorio, who's basically he has the physique of Lupin.
Okay. Yeah.
Tall and spindly.
Yeah.
And he's kind of the loudmouth that wants to be a doctor.
Okay.
which doesn't fit into the shonen series at all. But he's a fun character. But anyway,
sounds interesting.
so they go through various adventures, and there's not like I don't know that any particular one great message I put. Well, I'll say this. What's surprising about it too is that they kind of establish these 4, but then they kind of go their separate ways, and then sometimes come back. And and this is sort of one disadvantage in that toward the end, one of the longest story arcs is like 60 episodes.
Wow.
Only involves 2 of them.
Oh.
And a
Weird.
new cast of characters.
That's like almost half the show.
It is. And so, I mean, and the first half, I think I told you this the other night, that like the first portion, like the first third of it gets really dark.
Yeah.
Like there had been a dark like mafia storyline where a lot of people died, but it's like, okay, it's a mafia story mixed in with a revenge story. That's kind of to be expected. But this other one involved like ants.
Yeah, you said it was
like,
some sort of weird and
it was like these giant killer ants, which sounds like a bee relationship thing, but it was more like these giant ants that basically when they eat something they take on the characteristics of it. And so then they start eating humans and so
it's disgusting.
And you start it's not like in a fun like it's a monster movie sort of thing. It's like like you're tearing they're tearing apart little kids. I mean, you're not seeing them tear apart little kids, but that's what they did.
Well,
it's like one of those cases where like not seeing it is almost worse.
When anime is very good at being very disturbing sometimes.
Yes. Yeah,
it's that a whole animation because it's more simple is more powerful.
So the first third of that, which is almost a season in itself, it's basically things just kind of getting worse and worse and worse as this ongoing threat emerging, and not only the NPC die, but then there's a particular character that gets killed off, and it just goes bad and bad and bad, and then eventually they sort of like kind of stem the tide, but then it's all been building to this king basically, who is basically, I think the only reason you can kind of build him up as strong as they do is that think of him as like basically a living philosopher's stone.
Oh, okay.
Not as powerful as like at the end of Full Metal Alchemist, but I mean insanely strong because of that. Basically because he's had all these people fed into him.
What is it with Japanese and like eating off other people's life force?
I don't know.
It's just kind of disturbing.
But it's and you would think that he'd be the most evil character, and initially he is very much. But then there's this really interesting storyline where he gets into this. They basically made up some sort of game that was sort of a mix of chess and Go.
Okay.
But basically he gets into this rivalry with this blind girl who's like the most unkempt creature, kind of the very opposite end of him being all uber strong. He's like, and she's like uber weak, and he get into but he can't beat her at this game.
Okay,
and it slowly starts bringing in the humanity, and they start exploring more eventually that because these things are part human, some of them start wrestling with their own like humanity of the whole thing.
Interesting, and
so it gets really interesting later on.
I'm not sure I have time for 140 episodes.
Yeah,
it sounds good.
And that's the thing. It was like getting through. Sometimes I had to do some marathon sessions. Yeah. Like toward the end, like the last arc of them basically invading the main ants' fortress, and like all the preparations they have to go through to do that. I think I told you like at some point there's like 7 episodes.
It takes up like 3 seconds or 3 minutes.
3 minutes of the actual mission.
That's insane.
Just they time it out with all this, and the narrator gets into this like, well, the reason he was doing this, and usually narrators don't work like that, but because in most anime, in a lot of anime, you're used to like having someone do commentary. It kind of works with like kind of explaining what's going on and the idea that these characters are moving like kind of like some of them. If it was a American comic book, it'd be like the speed of the Flash.
Okay.
Where, basically a lot of thoughts go through their mind in a matter of a millisecond.
Okay. Interesting.
So like, okay, I can sort of see where you're going.
Yeah, you should talk about that one. That's pretty interesting. And it's not Sanderson.
Yes, it's not Sanderson. It's surprising not it's talked about as like, I mean, it did finish. I think it finished last year sometime. But I haven't heard it talked about nearly as much as other ones. And I liked it a lot.
Interesting.
So
cool beans.
So man, I shouldn't have talked about all that stuff. Now I'm gonna have to talk about it all over again.
Well, that one time when we had to re-record it, we did better.
That's true.
The second time through. So
maybe practice will make perfect.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we do this brainstorm beforehand.
Yeah, that's true.
So that we can be sound all smart and everything. because
Yeah.
people like to listen to smart people. I
I
guess.
suppose. I don't know why.
That sounds horrible, but luckily that's not on there.
Well, maybe that's why no one listens to our podcast.
Yeah. All right. So when does the podcast start here?
I don't know. But, oh, you also said you wanted me to talk about Comic-Con?
I thought, if you could find something cool to say for the podcast, yeah. I mean,
Well, I'll tell them. I'll tell them that we'll have some interesting things for them later on, because I took Leo
yeah.
there, and he was up to his usual hijinks. But we'll see. That will probably be a few weeks on the road, because I'm hopefully leaning towards. I don't know if I'll say this on the podcast or not, but I'm hopefully leaning towards starting up the YouTube channel that I've talked about for a while.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah, if you
But
say
we'll
it, then you'll have to do it.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
I've we won't mention Darian's story.
No,
here.
no. Some things should not be mentioned on the podcast. I should. What do you think? Should I mention? Have you read any of my recent flash fictions?
Yes.
Anyways, I thought about maybe I should mention the Awake one just because it's second person and we were talking meta, and so it's a very interesting. It's you. The whole thing is done in you do this, you do that, which I don't know if I ever wrote a story like that.
I think I completely forgot that it was in second person.
It works so naturally.
I didn't even.
But it's
think
kind of.
about
I mean,
that.
it's not quite meta, but I thought it might be worth mentioning. Awake.
Yeah,
So.
that is that one I enjoyed. The other one is very weird.
The dream ship is super weird. Don't get me wrong.
I think I understood where you were going with it, but after I was like, what? Ooh, interesting.
That was one that largely. Both those were taken off Final Fantasy X songs.
Okay.
I mean, I'm still trying to get.
Oh
through
wow,
that.
you went back to that.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to finish these 4 discs. I'm like halfway through disc 2, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to.
I thought you finished this too. You're only halfway through.
Well, I'm probably more than halfway. Anyways, I think those were both Seymour themes. If that helps explain anything.
A little bit.
So, and then I have a third one based on another song, and the problem is it's not flash fiction anymore. It'll be a relatively short story, but it.
Well, didn't you say that these two flash fictions were originally one story that you wound up breaking up?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I wrote them both within like 2 days of each other.
I thought you said some on your Facebook
maybe
something
I
to
misunderstood. Yeah,
or maybe I misunderstood.
Or I might wrote it badly. Not the first time. That's why you'd practice before you do it.
Before we do these
Yeah.
things.
Anyway, I thought I might mention that just because, if you think it's worth mentioning.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
Okay.
I don't know. If
Oh, sorry, I distracted. You have something to mention about Comic-Con, you think?
Well, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I've never been to one that size before. I mean, I've been to Fort Wayne. Well, I should take that back. I've been to a gaming convention in Columbus. That was.
See, I've never been to a Comic-Con. I went to a Star Wars Celebration back
Okay.
in the day, like right before episode 2.
And like a lot of conventions now, it's not necessarily just one thing, because I mean, the headline celebrities were Carrie Fisher from Star Wars and Jenna Coleman from Doctor Who, which, I mean, they both have comic book lines, but that's not the main thing. Speaking of Doctor Who, I'll have to mention when we do the story school that there actually is a Doctor Who comic where the 11th Doctor comes to our world, where Doctor Who is a TV show.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. There's
great.
There's some fangirl that kind of, I mean, not a teenage fangirl, but like a 10-year-old or something that takes him around and shows him things, and he's correcting, like, I think he meets Matt Smith.
See, whenever you have long-ranging things, you can do stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think toward the end he says something like, you know who should really play me? Peter Capaldi. I think he'd be really good at it.
That's great.
Yeah. But anyway, but yeah, so you see a lot of stuff. Probably, I guess the cosplayers, there's slightly more comic book characters, primarily, several Harley Quinns.
Oh yeah.
A couple Poison Ivies, some Batmans. I think about it, I don't remember seeing much Superman, which makes me sad. I know Nate had a Superman shirt and a cape on, but no like full-fledged ones. Anyway,
you'll just have to go Superman next time.
No, I didn't do any costumes except for Leo, which drew some heads.
Well, yeah, probably less there than other places.
in some ways. But Jenna Coleman's panel was nice. They did the one where basically they opened the mic up for anyone to ask questions the whole time, and unfortunately, some of those wound up being very repetitive. A lot of
it's a shame they don't like screen them beforehand or something.
Yeah, I think I've seen sometimes they do that.
They'll just ask, "Hey, what are you going to ask?"
Yeah, I mean, and they weren't necessarily all. I mean, it was usually some very. I mean, not all of them. Where sometimes someone asks something really unusual, like, "Can you actually cook a souffle?"
Yeah. Could she?
I don't think so. She said they're actually very difficult to make, but she got asked some variation of, so what was your favorite about working with Matt as opposed to Peter? And it's like, she can only answer that, a certain
political
way.
sort of way.
Yeah. It's like she can't have a favorite between the two.
No.
I mean, seriously.
Just because fans do doesn't mean.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you ask the actress who will have to work with them.
Yeah, it's like sometimes no guys, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. But the Carrie Fisher one, she took 2 questions at the very end, but that one was more of an interview. That she had someone up there talking with her. But yeah, as we said on Facebook, Carrie Fisher is crazy.
I saw both you and Nathan posted that.
Well, here's the funny thing though. I said something about her being elderly, but she's really only 58. Which is not as old as I would have pictured from her being up there.
Yeah.
I think that's partly because she's one of these people that will just say anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some older people,
they don't care anymore.
They don't care anymore. Yeah. And so that's why that and
we should get one of them on this podcast.
And she had gray hair, and she carried herself like a little bit older. And I think that's partly because of the bipolar thing.
Yeah.
And she's gone through a lot personally. I think so.
Yeah, I think you should mention some of that because I think it's interesting. It's not quite a take on tail, but
yeah. I mean, I
find it interesting. I mean, I like listening to this.
Stories from me having been there, and since we talk about Doctor Who and Star Wars a lot,
makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of and then a nice variety of vendors there too. I mean, definitely more comic book vendors. I mean, that was if there's anywhere where it felt especially Comic Con, there was certainly more comic book vendors than in the other 2 conventions I've been to.
Okay.
The other one being a small anime convention in Fort Wayne, and then
I remember you going to that one.
Then I went to Origins Game Fair in Columbus, Ohio.
Where you work?
Yeah, when I worked at the library.
Yeah,
and that was very much a gaming convention, primarily board games. So yeah, sometime it'd be fun to go to Gen Con. I know Aaron does that.
Yeah, Nathan.
Yeah, Nathan does that too. Yeah. But I know that's also a very gaming centric one. Although I think it's kind of like a lot of conventions is open up to. Other
we
things.
keep thinking about taking Chill in the Wells there. So
yeah, hopefully we'll.
I mean, Nathan always does, but take a bigger presence.
Yeah, it would be nice to do a bigger presence and maybe do another Leo video.
Dun dun dun. All right, so time's about running out here, isn't it?
Yeah, it's almost time for us to get started.
Okay, I think I got my notes. Do you need any water or anything before we get started on this podcast?
That would probably be a good idea. Let's see. Anything else? Do we want? Yeah. Do we want to plug the YouTube channel while we're doing this?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, we always want to tell people, see us on Derailed Trains of Thought, blogspot.com, and the YouTube channel where we do stuff. And
we got some comments on Weekly Hijack when I posted the YouTube links on the Fans for Christ page. We got So we actually got a few.
I saw the one from the one lady.
Yes, and then she commented
twice.
She commented on the next video too.
Okay, I did see those.
Yeah,
awesome.
But we'll have to get caught up with that. Sunday night.
Yes,
because we fell behind on Once Upon a Time because we were both gone. So.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why I'm telling you something that you already know, but
we gotta plan ahead. If you don't tell me, I don't do it.
That's true. So, that is true.
Yeah. All right, so I think we're finally.
We said we're at Strong Badia this time.
Strong Badia, yeah. I think.
Okay, we can talk about like that stop sign, and we'll say
and the cheat, and Homestar can come over.
Do you think we'll have to make sure we'll watch out? Remember the what is it? The bear holding a shark.
The bear holding a shark.
The security system. We'll have to pretend that we're watching out for that.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good one. We haven't done Strong. Homestar, I don't think so.
Well,
we done a song from there.
Strong Badia is about the only place I can.
That's true.
Unless I suppose you could do Bub's concession stand.
Or I watched recently. What was it? Sweet Puddin' Cakes. That weird alternate dimension.
Alternate dimension.
Putt place. Yeah.
That's.
Oh, we could just meet at that whale fake. So we're like, please, it's the greatest day.
We'll do the Sweet Cup and Cakes universe when we want to get into
Alternate reality or
alternate
something.
mind bending or
Like,
yeah.
and here are the episode on drug induced.
Our Salvador Dali inspired.
First,
world.
we'll be talking about Yellow Submarine, and then, all right, yeah, you got us all set up. You know, we're not going to have any mic problems.
Yeah, I think we should be good.
We didn't really advertise today, but
Yeah.
that was
I said earlier on Facebook that we were brainstorming.
Okay, so people will be ready to listen to us.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so let's
do
get
this
ready, and I'll start up our intro. Say, Nick, we weren't recording this whole thing, were we?
You're in charge of that stuff. I don't know.
Huh.